Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today I want to share with you how my 5-year-old daughter got gluten. If you're new here, I have a 5-year-old daughter with celiac disease. And being gluten, what does that mean? It means she was exposed to gluten and ingested it and had the symptoms of what happens to celiacs when they ingest gluten. So how this happened was, and this is our first gluten exposure, I would say, in a year and a half. She was diagnosed at age 3.5. She recently just turned 5. So we've had a really long stretch of her not being exposed to any type of gluten. So we were at a Halloween trunk or treat event. If you don't know what trunk or treat is, it's where you decorate the trunk of your car and trick or treaters come. And it was a church event, and there was pizza there that was ordered. And I, of course, brought my daughter her own pizza. I baked it in an oven with, foil on the pan and everything. There was no cross-contamination possible. I was actually very careful with it. So my other two children, I also have a 1.5-year-old and an 8-year-old who have not shown signs of celiac disease. They had normal pizza with their dad, and I and my 5-year-old had the gluten-free pizza. So I gave my daughter her gluten-free pizza. She sat down. She was at the trunk, because we're handing out candy. She sat down, ate some of it, and then she wanted a drink, so I took her inside to get a drink. And unknown to me at the time, while she put her pizza down, my 1.5-year-old son went over and ate a couple pieces of it. Now, my 1.5-year-old son, as I said before, had regular pizza, so he had gluten-filled pizza. And when he bit into my daughter's gluten-free pizza, he pretty much cross-contaminated with it, because he had gluten in his mouth from ingesting gluten pizza. He transferred that gluten onto my daughter's pizza. So again, my husband was handing out candy at this time and didn't notice that he had walked over and grabbed her slice and ate a couple pieces. So by the time I get back out there, my daughter picks up her pizza right away, and I notice it's not the same size as when we left it. So I asked what happened. My husband's like, oh, he must have went over there and took a bite. And I said, he can't have a bite. He had gluten pizza. It's cross-contamination. And at this point, she'd already eaten the majority of the pizza, or the piece of pizza. So I was like, okay, well, let's see how it goes. She was fine that night. She did her trick-or-treating, no issues. But, of course, the next morning, she woke up with a stomach ache. And I want to share this because I want people to understand that it can take a very small amount of gluten to make someone with celiac disease very sick. So I remember telling a friend that this happened. She's like, wow, that wasn't very much at all. And I said, no, it literally takes a breadcrumb amount to make someone with celiac disease really sick. So she had a stomach ache. And I also want to talk about how my daughter's main symptoms of before she was even diagnosed and after she ingests gluten now is not necessarily gastrointestinal. So she doesn't necessarily have the bloating, the diarrhea, the vomiting, like it's commonly believed a lot of celiacs do. Now, if she had a large exposure, it could be different. She could have those symptoms right away, but again, we haven't had any type of large exposure like this. So her main symptom was she had a stomach ache, and her behavior was completely different. And this is what I think is really important, because there can be a wide array of signs and symptoms of someone with gluten intolerance or celiac disease, not just gastrointestinal. So what do I mean about behavior? When she ingests gluten, and this is one of the first symptoms she ever showed before even having any gastrointestinal issues, was her behavior changed drastically. So she becomes extremely whiny, extremely emotional. She becomes she gets very foggy brain. She's very forgetful. She'll walk into a room and forget what she's doing. And yeah, I have that problem, but I'm in my mid-30s, so that's a little different. But her brain is just really foggy. It's very hard for her to focus. And she was like that for the brain fog and the emotional, and just everything was life and death and just a lot of tantrums. It just changed like a light switch went off. That morning when she woke up, and the only gastrointestinal symptom she told me is that her stomach hurt. But I could tell her behavior had changed drastically, and I knew gluten was involved. And her stomach hurt for a few days after that. So it's not something like they eat it, it passes through their system, and it's gone. It's not. When she eats it, her body attacks the lining of her intestines, so it's doing damage, and that damage continues. And again, if she's in repeated exposure to gluten, that damage gets worse and worse, and it affects her ability to absorb nutrients. But she had the exposure and still had to deal with the ramifications of that days and probably weeks later, because her gut has to re-heal after the exposure. So this is just a video to let you know that if you notice your child eats something, they won't necessarily always show you the physical symptoms, like the vomiting, the diarrhea. There are other things to look for. And the biggest trigger I have noticed with my child is behavioral changes. So again, if you're a parent, a caregiver, and you notice these things, don't hesitate to push for answers, because not everything will look exactly like it's supposed to textbook-wise. And like I said, with celiac disease, there can be a wide range of symptoms. So I hope this was helpful, and my daughter is feeling better. The behavior has returned and her stomach doesn't hurt, but again, she's dealing with that not just for a day or two, but actually for quite a while that she's healing. And just to be aware of how difficult it can be to have celiac disease and how difficult it is to deal with cross-contamination. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. Thanks for watching.